Okay, so now we have Sergey Gavriletz who will talk about the dynamics of social complexity and modeling it.
Thank you. Thanks a lot to the organizers for inviting me. This is the first time I'm in Israel, and it's been pretty cool. I'm learning a lot. Very great experience. Okay, so there is kind of a controversy, a little controversy brewing, I think, in this room. Just wanted to clarify how I view this. So the question is, are humans undergoing a major evolutionary transition? That's the first question. And of course, the answer depends on how you define a major evolutionary transition. And if we follow the tradition that's been established in evolutionary biology, I think at least since the publication of Leo Bass' book, where the main emphasis is on kind of individuality and new levels, I don't think humans qualify here. But at the same time, humans are clearly distinctive or even unique in a number of very important and exciting characteristics. And I'm a theoretician, so I'm working with mathematical models. And the question that I have here, and something that I will describe later, is related to theoretical tools available. And although methods from game theory and from evolutionary game theory and from population genetics, from classical methods can take us to a certain level, there are exciting questions that require kind of modifications and extensions of these methods. And that's what I'll be trying to describe you here today. So when you think about humans, about human evolution, there is a number of important questions. What makes us the unique species, as some people claim we are, how we came to be, and how we came to be, this is a question about selective forces and selective constraints. And then there are questions about implications of our evolutionary past for our modern behavior and how we can predict it, and maybe how we can make our societies better. So about human uniqueness or difference, there is a list of different features that different researchers emphasize, and it's cognitive abilities, language, social norms, social institutions, cooperations, and things like that. But I believe there is now an emerging consensus in this field that basically everything boils down pretty much to cooperation. So humans are unique cooperators, and there are two general types of cooperative actions, and I will call them us versus nature and us versus them. So that is important. Of course, humans are not a unique species that cooperates. Cooperation is widespread among animals, but humans do it at a completely different scale. And why we do that? Well, basically, cooperation can be extremely beneficial. But to achieve these benefits, there is a number of obstacles that we have to overcome. We need to be able to coordinate actions. We need to be able to resolve different conflicts. We need to avoid free riders, cheating, and things like that. So the question of free riding is extremely important, and it comes under in economics and now in evolutionary biology and cultural evolution. It comes under the rubric of collective action problem, and it's something that Mansur Olson identified in his PhD work like 55 years ago. So if you have a group of people and everybody is sharing the benefits of whatever the group produces, then there is always motivation, temptation to reduce the effort because you can get stuff for free. And this is something quite generic for cooperation in humans and also in many animal groups. And how to overcome it is a big challenge. But nevertheless, animals and humans were able often to overcome this problem. So we make decisions that are right. So how we make these decisions? Well, again, I have kind of a list of factors that are important and that are emphasized in different scientific areas. So there are material cost-benefit considerations that are kind of typically emphasized in economic research. There are social instincts, something that evolved by biological factors. There is experience, learning. We make errors, and then there are things that we impose on ourselves. social norms in institutions. So actually, in my talk, I'll touch on several of which. So I'm, as I already said, I'm a theoretician. So I'll outline kind of a general framework what I follow, but it's not my invention. It's kind of general that is used in the field. So we look at groups of individuals. Individuals make effort in a particular type of collective action. They are subject to this collective action problem. Individuals are heterogeneous, and that's very important. Typically, it's something that is neglected in majority of theoretical approaches. They are motivated by different factors that are already listed, and then there are between group interactions, and there are different costs. And the question is how cooperation in these groups can happen. So once you if we go into some details, and one very simple approach, each individual makes a particular effort, and it can be an effort in production, or it can be effort in monitoring, or in coordination, whatever. And then we find the group effort. In the simplest case, we just sum up individual efforts. And when we need to define what the collective action is, and as already said, I believe there are two general types of collective action that our ancestors were involved in, us versus nature, and us versus them. And we're kind of still present in modern humans. And a simple way to describe these two actions is to simply say that the probability of success, well, it increases with the group effort, and then use different scaling to specify this probability. So in the case of us versus nature, x0 is kind of effort of the nature instance, right? But the probability of success grows with the group effort. In the case of us versus them, instead of the nature effort, we have the total effort of our groups against which we compete. And for those of you who are more familiar with game theoretic framework, so here we have nonlinear public goods game. Here we have something where the economists we call contest theory, and in both cases it's basically volunteer's dilemma, not much more popular prisoner's dilemma. Okay, so after that we define material benefits. So this is what individual had before. This is what group produces. This is a share going to individual I, and this is the cost. And there can be heterogeneity in all these factors and parameters. And then we have interactions between groups. In the simplest case, we can just say that the group survives with probability proportional to its success in collective action. That makes sense. Okay, and when individuals make decisions, and the way to capture this is, well, there are different ways of doing that. I'll talk about that in a second, but one simple, here we introduce something economists call utility function, that combines material and normative benefit. So it is parameter that measures, say, the strength of norm internalization. If it is 0, you only care about material benefits or cost. If it is 1, you don't care about material things, you just do whatever you believe is right? Whatever norm or beliefs you chosen to accept. Okay. And then there is an additional important component that is actually extremely important, but somehow people, even professionals working in this field, they don't really realize it. It comes under the notion of strategy revision method or strategy revision protocol. So basically, it's how people choose their actions and their behaviors. So economists and classical economics is all about matched equilibrium. If you lift methods from population genetics, it will be just random mutation, random innovation. But that's not all. There is a lot of our things and our approaches that can and actually are used for people. We strategize, we try to find optimal decisions, we learn individually or we learn from everybody else. We are trying to improve our life with some kind of design and things like that. And of course, we also make errors. So, and as I already said, even in evolutionary biology, just historically, and probably it's also related to the reasons where most people are coming from, like population genetics, only one particular strategy update method is used. And we can talk about that because it's not necessarily the really appropriate method in many situations. And just to show you what the difference in strategy update methods can do, here is the simple classical game. It's rock, scissors, paper, right? So it's the same game, it's the same payoffs. And what is shown here are dynamics, and the colors show the speed of evolution. So here are circles. So basically, you can see they look very different, right? So the classical game here, it has three components: players, strategies, payoffs. Evolutionary game here actually brings something additional that is extremely important, and that's actually a lot disregarded. And certain things that are viewed as challenge under one strategy update protocol actually disappear under something else. And that's a pretty cool and exciting field of research.
What is the third one?
Huh?
What is the third one? Third row. The red, yeah, this one.
This is logit, and I think this is best response.
No, it means in general. What's the third item?
Oh, well, that's
Is it the classical vector?
no, players, strategies, payoffs. You identify players, you identify what they can do, and then you construct the payoff matrix. So these are three components in classical game. Right? While in version game here, there is the fourth component: how you make these changes, how you make this decision. Okay, so what I'll try to do today, I want to look at three different topics, and I'm not sure how far away I will look in it. So I'll talk about new strategy revision method, that I believe is extremely powerful. We call it foresight. I'll talk about social norms, and I'll also talk about actually social institutions here, because all these things are, so this is kind of related to cognition, this is related to social norms, and this is related to social institutions, and these are things that are probably unique. Well, of course, except for the first one. So, yeah, the foresight part is the collaboration with two graduate students I have been collaborating, and Michael Bowes. And just to motivate you, and that's how I got into this field, right? So I'm interested in preparation. Preparation is difficult to start, it's difficult to maintain, and people have been looking for different ways to do that. And punishment is extremely powerful way to maintain preparation, right? Actually, Rob Boyd and Peter Richardson said that full paper that punishment allows for preparation of anything that you want. And that's indeed true. But punishment itself is costly. So a few years after they published their paper, people realized that, yeah, it kind of just pushes the problem a little bit away. So there is a second order free rider problem. Punishment to administer punishment, I have to make certain efforts, and this is costly. Why I would do that? Other people will benefit, so we can get back to where we were. And there is a number of solutions that people have been focusing on, theoreticians have been studying. But when I kind of started looking into this, kind of the whole idea didn't quite make much sense to me. Like when our son was little, all right, and then he would do something that we didn't like. We were trying to modify his behavior. So in a sense, it was always for me the case that his future behavior was a part of my utility function. All right. Moreover, I knew how he will likely react to certain actions on my part. Okay. So this is what the idea of foresight is about. We do care about future benefits, not just immediate benefits, and we kind of can anticipate how everybody else, how our partners will react to our action. Okay, and the second component is related to what is known in psychology as the theory of mind. It's the ability to reason about the knowledge and thought process of ours. And humans, we can do kind of multiple levels of this, but also primates, great apes, right? They have pretty much similar ability. Franz de Waal has been arguing about this for years, and then there were a couple of papers in Science to that effect. And actually, once you kind of realize that and you start looking at what is around, you find that basically this idea is already there, and it's kind of in the open side. You just need to pick it out. Like Axelrod and his famous kind of one of the most cited papers in this field, when he discussed the ways to maintain cooperation, he had this mechanism, he called it deterrence. And a person may realize that even if punishment and defection is costly now, it might have long-term gains by discouraging defections later. Okay, it's as clear as it can be. And then there is this another classical paper. I think that's actually probably the most cited paper in this field, like 10,000 citations, where they studied effects of punishment on cooperation. So this is a group cooperation with punishment, without punishment, and with punishment. But the focus was kind of on what happens during the series of experiments. But what you should be able to see is that just telling people that there will be an opportunity for punishment immediately change their behavior. Right? So even before any actual punishment happens. That's what we expect. That's what we know. That's what is a part of our psychology. So it's already there. And when Max did some nice experiments relatively recently, so we kind of made players to play twice, and there was a probability or a possibility of punishment in the first step. And basically what we saw that people, like if I play with you and you do something right or wrong, I punish you when I expect you, like next time you'll change. So there is already expectation also as a part of our psychology that punishment will be effective. Right. Okay, so how we do it? Well, in a very simple mathematical way. As I said, foresight is two components, future benefits and the ability to predict what happens. Future benefits, I just take a weighted sum of payoffs, immediate payoffs and next time payoffs after my partner managed to react to my action. And then I need to predict what my partner will do. The simplest way to do it is just to ask yourself, what will I do if I were in their place? Okay, so that's basically the idea of foresight. And we had a couple of papers on that. One was published, two under review. So, for example, we looked at the peer punishment. And indeed, we showed that foresight can solve both first and second order degree free-rider problems. Also, interestingly, it produces division of labor. So it's like strong individuals start specializing in punishment, and weak individuals specialize in production. Right? And then also the evolution of social institutions. And what I want to touch upon here, kind of look at this application. So institutions, it's something that is uniquely human, right? There are different types of institutions, from food chain to democratic institutions, and the human social complexity grew dramatically in the last 5,000–6,000 years, and it's strongly believed that it's social institutions that drove its evolution. The question is how evolutions become effective and stable. And here there is a controversy. A large group of cultural evolutionists, some of them are my good friends and actually collaborators, they believe that the solution here is cultural group selection. Like and he discussed a couple of other alternatives, but we dismiss them. And Peter Richardson with like 15 co-authors or 15 co-authors, they basically say, well, there is nothing else that can do the same thing as a cultural group selection. But there are some problems here, right? And these problems we apply actually also to selective imitation, right? At the individual level, if we talk about cooperation, cooperators have low fitness, defectors have high fitness, so they are more likely to be captured. Right? But then there is this thing, everybody is different. And there is no guarantee at all that something that is good for you will be good or even feasible for me. And that's a very crucial problem. And then at the level of groups, at the level of social institutions, it's pretty much the same. You need to know to get a lot of information. Information has to go from one group to another group, and they often compete. But even if you know all that, it's not very easy to implement really changes and create a new institution. And then there are some other things that are important from psychological point of view, but are disregarded here. Okay, so but there is a more traditional approach. People, like, we are bounded rational. We kind of know what we want, at least, well, on a certain time scale. So we attempt to make changes that will be good for us as a group or for some segment, most powerful segment of this, and things like that. And it kind of goes back to Ostrom, Nobel Prize winner, who identified design principles for that and things like that. Okay, so this approach is also not free from some limitations, okay? But it can be overcome using this method of foresight that I already told you. So now I modify a model a little bit. I introduce the institution of punishment, like there is leaders who try to improve group collective action, and leaders, so they'll make effort, monitoring effort, identifying free riders. And then I want to see what happens here. And in this model, we compare different strategy revision protocols from standard, like random mutation or selective imitation, to meiotic optimization to foresight. And what it turns out that only selective imitation between groups and foresight can work. And it just, you don't really need to look into the details. This is selective imitation, this is foresight. Right, and they look similar, so basically that's what's happening. It's some efforts depending on parameter value. So it turns out that actually foresight can do, well, in this formal model, pretty much the same thing as selective imitation, as group selection in a sense. Right? Mathematically, the reason is that in these two models we have similar Nash equilibrium, right? But I don't want to go into this detail. But I want to emphasize that the model was made very conducive for selective imitation. All groups were the same, information was transferring between groups at the same rate, and things like that. Once we introduce heterogeneity, once we make transfer of information more difficult, it's actually foresight that that's foresight will win. Of course, when there are both mechanisms in place, that's the best, because with foresight you invent things that are good, and selective imitation allows to spread it, like in infectious disease way, right? There are multiple equilibria, and that's well known. And Paul,
I'm just taking notes.
yeah, he raised that question about selection, how like group beneficial things can evolve by selection, without selection, right? That was your question. So in biology, it's impossible, but here it actually can happen. To improve your group, well, you can do it by foresight without having any outgroups. So there is selection, but it's kind of mental selection. You play with games in your into your brain. You select the best variant that you think will do it.
But how does that get optimized? What's the optimizing principle?
I choose a strategy, and then I see what happened. And when I try to update it again, so I kind of compare possibilities given some information that I have. Okay, so that's a new type of selection, all right, and that's not present in biology, and it does not require really group competition. Like if I'm a king, I don't know, of a small kingdom, completely isolated somewhere in the jungle, well, I will make certain changes in social institutions to ensure that, like, my son or whoever inherited is not somebody else's son, something like that. So, like many people I listed, they emphasize the importance of cultural group selection, warfare, and for evolution of institutions as a necessary condition, but that's, I don't think it's the case. Okay, so that was about foresight. The second part is about social norms, and it's a collaboration with Peter Richards. And social norms are extremely important everywhere, right? So I just saw a quote somewhere, probably it was from Thomas Seller, saying something like, humans were like fish, we live in an ocean of norms that control our behavior completely. Something like that. And there are different norms, how you position yourself in the elevator, if you jaywalk or not, how you dress, and things like that. So interestingly, some norms Sometimes norms basically follow the norm because you want to avoid punishment or you want to draw approval. But several norms are internalized. They become a part of ourselves. So basically, we just do it because we believe it's the right thing to do. And people who have internalized norms, there are two consequences. I will follow the norm even if it's deleterious for me, if it results in costs. And I will actually criticize people who don't do it. And violating norm for people is often psychologically painful. You can measure it. But at the same time, most norms can be violated under certain conditions. So the question is why and how it evolves. So we build a model, and it kind of uses the framework that I outlined. So there is utility, it's kind of formal mechanism to capture certain decisions. There is material payoff, and there is a normative payoff here, all right? And then there is this parameter E, the norm internalization. So initially we look at the case when it is 0. So everybody cares only about material payoffs. And the question is, will it ever evolve from 0 to some positive values? That's the question that we'll look here. Model is kind of gets complicated. Oh, for you again, 2 time scales, fast and slow. So fast, it's when individuals make decisions, and slow, and as it evolves genetically. It is on some population genetic framework. And there are 2 types of selection. There is individual level selection, and there is group level selection. So group benefits if individuals behave in a cooperative way. Individuals pay costs for cooperating, but they also, if they just follow the norm rather than they try to figure out what is good for them, they save certain costs of making optimal decisions. So there are both costs and benefits.
So there really is a birth-death process going on at the level of groups there.
Well, yeah. So there are generations. Within each generation, everybody plays a number of games, like 40, 50 games, and then you also reproduce. Okay, and this is what happens. So there are 4 types of individuals who cooperate, not punish, cooperate and punish, and things like that. And then at some point, cooperators evolve. And these graphs, blood graphs, they show the dynamics of this eta in the population, right? So at each time point, I just measure eta for each individual who is present and put a blood pixel over there. So, and what you can see here, cooperation, instead of cooperation, coincides with evolution of eta to higher values. And what is also quite interesting here, where the population splits into 2 parts. There are individuals with very high eta, and there are individuals who don't give, who don't care at all. Red line shows the average. Average in this case, but that doesn't mean much. So in the jargon of adaptive dynamics, this is a branching. Well, that's what's happening here. And this is a quite generic event. For example, it happens over here. So eta norm internalization ability does evolve. Once it happens, it produces dramatic increase in cooperation, and also there is a lot of variation in this eta as predicted. And just to avoid the immediate question, why this happens? Well, from the group perspective, it's good to have cooperators, but you don't want everybody, in a sense, to pay the cost. Sometimes it's enough to a certain proportion. Okay, so norm internalization does evolve under a range of conditions. The driving force of this is selection, and there are 2 different types of selection. There is group level selection, and there is also individual selection. Yeah.
Did you say, I'm not sure, what's the mechanism by which groups give rise to new groups? Do you just take a random sample? Do you, what transfers?
Yeah. Well, yeah, the group survives with the probability proportional to its success in collective action. Yeah, so certain groups flow probability of success. Yeah, you'll just cut it. Yeah, you just cut it. Yeah, so it's I think it's like Fisher-Wright process at the level of groups. All right, and then there is this interesting observation here. Pretty much similar outcomes happen when you have us versus them or us versus nature games. And that's surprising because in great majority of existing theoretical models, pretty much the only way to have cooperation evolved is to have some kind of warfare between group competition. And then if you're kind of anthropologist, it's a controversial topic to what extent warfare was present in our ancestors until, I don't know, 5, 6, 7,000 years ago. So here, I think that's kind of the first model where it evolves in us versus nature cases. Moreover, it's actually the situation where everybody benefits from cooperation, because in us versus them games, so much effort is wasted in competition, in contests, where everybody becomes worse off. Yeah. Okay. Punishment is very important. So societies that promote punishment of norm violators survive much better. And then I already mentioned that extreme heterogeneity in norm internalization is predicted. So and that's actually what neuropsychologists find. There are people who care about norms a lot, right? And we know there are people who are willing to sacrifice their life or do whatever it takes. And at the same time, there are people who don't care at all. So that's kind of a prediction here. Okay. And then, of course, there are parameters. Parameters naturally depend on environmental conditions. So we would predict some differences between local populations in different parts of the world in this. Okay, and finally, it's about evolution of institutions, and it's collaboration between Damien and Alex and Max. So there is a growing, a trend, growing inequality in the US and in some other English countries. And in the US, it started like in the early 70s, and it's something that worries a lot of people. Inequality is growing. And from historical record, Walter had a nice book on that. We know that things like that were happening before, right? So it's Latin America, Europe, the United States at long runs. So it's been happening. The question is, can inequality go down? Well, and Walter's analysis says that it can, but it's all, whenever it goes down, it's always associated with something pretty bad. So he talks about these 4 horses of Lenin: warfare, revolution, natural disasters, or things like that. Okay. Another question is if these thoughts are crucial for reducing inequality. Are they inevitable? And Milankovich, in our interesting book, says that pretty much yes. Inequality and growing inequality will pretty much necessarily lead. So kind of wanted to check these intuitions using mathematical models. So now I have a model of collective action, but now it's working not with individuals, but with factions of the society. You can think about different political parties, or you can think about different regional elites, groups, or they were regional or religious or political, right? So they will be cooperating in the state. They will make or not effort in joint production in cooperation. Now I will interpret factions differ not only in the way they cooperate or not, but also in political power, right? And the faction on top, this is a state, then there is elite, and there is counter-elite factions that do not cooperate. And when we do pretty much similar thing as before, we define material payoffs, but now the share of the reward that goes to the faction depends on its political power. Right? If you're a member of the government coalition, you get something there. Right? If not, well, you'll suffer. And then we need to describe how power changes. And there is another game from economics called contest. Basically, factions make contributions that depend on their political power and economic resources, and that redefines political power. And here there is a parameter epsilon. I call it incumbency parameter. And basically, that's the way the bigger epsilon is, the more the powerful factions are able to change the rules of game to their own advantage. If epsilon is 0, we are not able to do it. So basically, it's related to democratic check and balances. Right? And then we also introduce normative values. I'm speaking fast because I'm running out of time. So there are material benefits, but there are also normative things. Like you can believe that the state must I mean, the interest of state extremely important, right? Or you care about what's going on in the general population and you're trying to reflect things like that. So we capture that. Okay, and then we have this model. So there are some analytical results, but these are numerical results. So here, for example, again, this is time. The cooperating fraction is shown in black. The defecting fraction is shown in white. And you can see like there are periods of stability and then there is collapse. And here I have economic resources, and here this is resources and this is power. So what you see, there are periods where, and the black line, I think, yeah, it's a Gini index of inequality. So there is a period of stability, but inequality keeps growing. And when the system enters some regime where things kind of are interesting and very dynamic, and then there is collapse in cooperation and the collapse in resource production. So growing inequality results in breaks in cooperation and potentially disasters there. And there are certain factors that affect. Again, there are numerical data that are not relevant, but basically democratic check and balances are important for stability. High conformity with the state is important, but conformity with the majority of peer factions actually goes the other way around. And initial inequality, decrease of stability, and variation in endowment, and the presence of additional state resources. You can think of oil or whatever that the state can extract without ensuring cooperation between state factions that will decrease instability. And now we wanted to test various predictions. All right, so my collaborators collected data from 43 European countries from the 20th century, and it's data on GDP, on inequality, on conflict, and the presence of democratic institutions, and importance of norms. So there are different sources. So this table is to illustrate the link between model parameters and the data. And when we do that, and again, the way we do that, we use regression analysis, where there is independent, very dependent variable, and this is conflict, right? And we regress it on our explanatory variables. It will be conflict at the previous time moment. It can be 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, GDP, inequality, and different norms. And what we see is pretty much in line with our predictions. Inequality increases internal conflict, decoupling economic power and political power that can be done through democratic institutions, reduce conflict levels. Massive support for state and volume of independent thought. It's something that makes societies more stable. Okay, so that's the last slide. So kind of I look at three different topics. One is foresight. So kind of our modeling approach is kind of new, but it's something well established already experimentally. It just makes general sense. It makes sense from general considerations. This is a very simple natural generalization of best response, and it solves a lot of problems, collective action problems. Social norms is a great way to ensure cooperation, and social norms are indeed everywhere. And then inequality creates instability, and it's very dangerous. Thank you.
I think we have time for one or two questions.
No, I spared the comments. I just have a question regarding the foresight. I mean, that was not clear to me. How much foresight? Second, that is also a polymorphic trait, right? So you will expect that there are, excuse me for saying this, stupid and smarter agents in the population. So you know, because you cannot have the kind of experience learning from millions of examples like in deep learning, right? So
yeah. So about the extent of foresight, the way we are doing it, the model was in discrete time. So basically, it's foresight, you include expected payoff after the immediate round and one step forward. So it's basically, we call it one step foresight. So like myopic best response, you just adapt to whatever your group mates are doing. What we do here is we assume that once I make my change, they will react to my change, and that's what I include. And as far as the differences in abilities, no, we have not brought that into this model. There are some attempts to play with additional parameter that can be linked to cognitive abilities, because all decisions are stochastic, and there is some parameter like precision that can be linked to that. We've been working on that, but not bringing the two together yet.
One last very short question.
Yeah, about the foresight, like this here, again, the extent of foresight, like if you take it to a longer extent, maybe can you use foresight actually to reduce inequality, because clever individuals can know that actually inequality is bad. So in a way,
Well, with inequality, right, there are different in groups, different factions that have different preferences, right? So everybody is pursuing their own interest in a sense. Yeah, so sometimes, yeah, well, I mean, you're right. It's like in evolutionary biology, there is this thing, how it's called, reproductive concession, when when the dominant individual would let subordinate get some mating otherwise. Yeah, that's something that is needed. But I think the elites occasionally we realize that something that is needed, and we make social changes. Yeah.
Thank you, Yohay. Okay, so we made a slight change to the schedule, and we have Yohay talk now and the coffee break afterwards. So, like I said, now we have Yohay Carmel from the Technion, who will talk about comparing the major concisions.
Yes, good nearly afternoon, and I changed my title in view of comments that I heard here. So it's no more comparing major transitions. I'm only trying to discuss transitions in the level of individuality. So, as you can see here, society is complex. The level of interactions, the diversity of occupations, engagement, everything. Okay. I think everyone agrees here that in this room we can agree that as complex as it may be, it is not what is so-called superorganism. I'm not so fond of this term, but it is not a colony in the sense of ant colony or bryozoa. We are not there. However, I think it is a legitimate question to ask, and that's the question I'm going to ask today, is society, human society, undergoing a process of individuation? And if it does, where exactly are we in that process? So in order to be able to tell if we are undergoing a process of individuation, we need first to find criteria to characterize this process of individuation or changes in the level of individuality. And luckily, there were several times in the past in which there was such a process. So the first part of my talk will be about characterizing, or actually operationalizing, the process of change in the level of individuality. And the second part would be to apply it, the same framework to human societies. And so my route in this starts so very long ago, back in 1992. And in a way, it was similar to what Celine has described in the first evening, how did she get to work on the stuff that is of interest to her? She by random picked a book in the library, okay? In my case, it was similar, only it was mandatory, it was not voluntary. I was about to finish my master's thesis on foraging of bats. And towards the final exam, each examiner, in addition to defending my thesis, also assigned me a reading assignment, and I had to answer questions within the exam. And my Professor Eitan Chernov, whom I believe some of you may know, assigned this book to me. And it's a thick book, you should know. And it's not an easy book to read, let alone back in 1992. And I went through most of the book. And in the exam, he asked only a single question. And that is, please describe the drivers of complexity during evolution. My answer was poor. So in the following years, I chose conservation science. But that very question kept bugging my mind. And more recently, like in the last few years, more and more intensively until I decided to go to a sabbatical and make myself a lot of time to read books. And that's what I'm doing right now. And so this book was mentioned several times, and I used the opportunity to say that within this list of major transitions, there are at least 3, perhaps more, but we don't know much about the others, transitions that involve change in the level of individuality. And I'm only discussing this subset of transitions. So I prefer not to call it major transitions. Change the title. If you see anywhere in the slides, major transitions, just remember that that's what I'm referring to. So a change in the level of individuality, I like the word that Dan McShee proposed, individuation, implies that biological units that were previously independent are now incorporated within a higher level of organization, and at some point they become a new individual. And of course, we may run into this big problem of what is an individual. And there is a sea of papers about individuality with many different definitions, looking at physiological, evolutionary, and so on and so forth. I couldn't find one definition that would exactly fit my purposes, so I made yet another definition. That's not the topic of the talk today, but I think it may serve as a working definition for our goals. An individual is an entity capable of autonomous survival and reproduction. Of course, it is near previous definitions that focus on evolutionary aspects of individuality. So briefly going over several of those 3 events in the past. The first one, I would call it the greatest of all transitions. It might have not been the first one, of course, but that's, for all we know, is the one that we still have survivors of those transitions. It only happened once. If it happened more than once, there are no traces left today. So for us, it only happened once. The transition from bacteria to eukaryotic cells, okay? It's not a simple thing to do. You have an archaeon, okay, that swallows a bacterium, but does not digest it, but instead starting to cooperate with it. Next, that's number 2. I should have mentioned. That's on the framework of Dan McShee, which I like. The bacterium becoming an eukaryotic cell is level 1. Eukaryotic cell is level 2, and these multicellular organisms are level 3. But then we have multicellular organisms that join together to make a colony. Okay, everyone knows about the ants and the bees and the termites, and mole rats, perhaps some of you may have heard about some colonies of moorheads, but there is a range of marine invertebrates that went much earlier through the same transition. So insect colonies, workers can be viewed as mobile equivalents of somatic cells in an organism. So the first part of my talk is a collaboration with Ayelet Shapit, and it is about operationalizing major transitions, not major. Transitions in the individuality, okay? So we can compare between those. We have three different types of transitions. In terms of events, I mentioned it happens once in the case of periodicity, several times in the case of multicellularity, several times in the case of coloniality. Partners were entirely different in the case of eukaryoticity, identical in the case of multicellularity, and similar in the case of coloniality. Mobility of units was not invented then. It was invented in some of the cases here. Okay, we can join them together, make a colony, but each previously individual, okay, each lower level unit can retain its option of getting away, mobility, in some of the cases. So each transition was unique and substantially different from other transitions. So what's the merit of comparing between them? The answer is that similarities between these entirely different cases may indicate elements that are essential in the process. That's our, perhaps, working hypothesis. So the goal is a quantitative description of transition of individuality. We are going to operationalize the concept, and by this I mean we are going to characterize a fuzzy concept using a set of measurable parameters. So Dan McShee proposed one scheme to operationalize changes in individuality. There are not many others. Shaw has proposed something for the change in specifically for the change in those algae. The Vorotin algae. And our scheme is based on the notion that complexity, okay, is a crucial element in the change in the level of individuality. Plus has mentioned it, and you have mentioned it in your book. But how do we quantify complexity in living questions? That simple, basic question is left open and was not answered like in a robust manner, a decisive manner that's really widely agreed so far. Okay, so the scheme that we propose here is based on inspiration by three different books: Andrew Bird's Principle of Social Evolution, Biology First Law by Dan McShee, and the Evolution of Complexity, Evolution to Complexity by our Edwin here. So we suggest 4 elements for general characterization of a living system. System size, which is the number of lower level units, connectivity between units, differentiation or heterogeneity between units, and system depth, which is the number of hierarchical levels. Okay, this is not the only thing. We can add more characteristics, more parameters to characterize complexity, and we should note that complexity is not just one thing that we, look at it from different directions. Complexity is really an assortment of different traits. Okay, so it's not so simple, but still, to serve our goals, we propose this one. Okay, but in the case of system depth, for the change in the level of individuality, we ignore this at all. Okay, because we are only interested in the lower level and the new higher level. Okay, so we now ignore system size, inseparability, connectivity is difficult to robustly quantify. It's very difficult actually, but we may found some aspect of connectivity, which is inseparability, and that's easier to quantify, at least binary, in a binary manner of is it separable or not. Differentiation between units. We found two ways to characterize it: reproductive specialization and non-reproductive specialization. So system size is the number of lower level units. Inseparability is the incapacity of lower level units to survive and complete life cycles separate from the higher level. Reproductive specialization means that certain units of the system reproduce, others are incapable of reproduction. And non-reproductive specializations, there are at least two types of somatic units. Let us look if we can use this scheme in entirely different situations. So the first situation is a pressure, okay, is a present of nature. Nature gave us, in order to study transitions in the level of individuality, gave us Volvocene algae.
Well, I think it's worthwhile pointing out that the Volvocene algae, as you pointed out earlier on, are just one route to multicellularity.
Mm-hmm.
And they had very particular features of cell division in the ancestral type that I think allowed that route. But I'm just pointing out that I'm always a little reticent to generalize in terms of what we learn from the Volvocene algae, because I think that there have been multiple routes, and I think the starting material has determined the route by which these transitions have been taken.
I absolutely agree. And we learned from Volvocene algae and apply it only to Volvocene algae, and still there is a good lesson here, a very general lesson. Okay? So we look at them and we see that with time, well, I should not say with time, I'm not sure about time, but with the increase in the size of the organism, we get more traits, okay? So for the simple 4-cell Volvocene algae, they are still separable. They can decide to opt out, not anymore when they go farther. Reproductive specialization only occurs at the size of 128 or larger. And non-reproductive specialization, I'm not aware at least of any Volvocene algae that has it. This is just a in between to say that sponges are really beautiful. And now all other multicellular organisms were probably started in several different lines, and they are not of the same origin, unlike the Volvocene algae. They are very different. The only common property is that they are multicellular, and presumably once upon a time they were unicellular. Okay? So in all cases, except slime molds and trichoplasts, I chose only sponges to be a very ancient group and mammals to be a more modern group, but you can choose anywhere between them. In all cases, the system is very large, very, very large. And you can mark as existent already inseparability, reproductive specialization, and non-reproductive specialization. And there are two different cases, trichoplasts, which we don't know much about, so we are not sure about this one, but probably does have reproductive specialization and non-reproductive specialization from the little that we know. As for slime molds, I'm glad that you are here, because actually the way I did it is I looked at your paper from 2015 that says that even those slime molds that do not get together, they can continue and survive. Am I right?
The individual cells.
Yes, individual.
Yeah, I mean, slime molds tend to be chimeric actually in the fruit body stage, and I think there are many, what we're sold in the textbooks, I don't think it matches with what people are showing in reality. They're a very interesting set of organisms. I think that for the most part are doing very well in some gray area where the extent to which my criteria here for being multicellular, unitist selection, they are in a murky area. Heritability at the level of the collectives, I think, is low. I think probably the bulk of the time they spend as single-celled organisms.
Right.
And relatively rarely ever see a collective where selection.
So we can hardly classify them as multicellular organisms.
They're somewhere, yeah. But they have, yeah. Well, they are one of those interesting organisms, I think, because they don't conform to paradigmatic kinds of organisms worth thinking about in terms of what they do tell us about transitions and areas in between, perhaps paradigmatic transitions.
Yeah, maybe we should add to the list of topics of discussion for the rest of this workshop. What can we learn from these organisms?
And just, sorry, I'm holding the book. I mean, you've also got microbes, of course. 3.5 billion years ago, you have multicellular cyanobacteria. You have multiple transitions in prokaryotes.
And also you have the actinomycetes, because that practically an analogous lifestyle to the Steinboys, but at the prokaryotic level. They are even the fruiting body.
Yeah, Myxococcus, for example, to a bacterium that's big, like Dictyostelium.
We should look into them. If they don't have 3 minuses here, then we should certainly add them to this table. Now we go to a entirely different transition in the level of individuality. That's coloniality. And I know there are still some inaccuracies in this table that I'm going to fix. But generally speaking, we see a similar trend to the trend in multicellular. As size is growing, we get more and more of the traits that characterize multicellularity. In this case, that characterize aeosociality. Okay? So until we get to the level of thousands of organisms, we don't get inseparability. Inseparability is twin replacement impossible for the case of insects. Reproductive specialization is the presence of sterile workers. And non-reproductive specialization means, in the context of insects, worker polymorphism. Okay? But these two traits we don't get until, until hundreds or thousands of workers in the colony. And they appear more or less together. Whereas non-reproductive specialization, we only find it in termites and ants. So let me conclude this part. Inseparability is a crucial issue, okay? That was mentioned in your book, but widely neglected afterwards as a crucial element in the transition. It appears early in the process, either before or together with reproductive specialization. It makes the turning point. That's my speculation. A group becomes an individual of a higher hierarchical level. Why? Because it ties together the fitness of all inseparable lower level units. Okay, so we have cheats. They are the whole organism. Okay, at some extreme point, the whole organism dies, and the fitness of the cheats and the non-cheats, everything is zero. Okay, so it dictates conflict resolution, and it may be a major driving force through the transition. Size is a major predictor of complexity. Non-reproductive specialization appears late in the process. Only, and in both cases, only in systems larger than million. Okay, let me try and use the same scheme and apply it to human society. I'll skip over that one. This presentation will be online in the conference website, and you look at these marvelous indications that humans are super cooperators. Okay, and I'm going to skip over this one because it was already described by Celine, the numerous ways in which we already have behaviors that are pre-adaptations, okay, to a cooperative society. On the other hand, Human societies are also characterized by selfishness, conflict, and competition. They differ from superorganisms in fundamental ways, and this conclusion led Stephen Stearns to conclude that, to ask and answer, yes, we are. He asked, are we stored pathway through a major evolutionary transition from individual to group? And he said, yes, we are. There is no more evolution. You know, evolution needs millions of years. But I suggest, I argue that we are not stored at all, not even for 1 minute. And the reason is there are many people in this room that make this a career about cultural and socio-technological evolution, and they know very well that an evolutionary transition may take millions of years, but cultural evolution may proceed at the rate of decades or hundreds of centuries. See, for example, this taken for a website called Our World in Data, how the rate of homicide, how homicide rate goes down at different European countries within several centuries. This is not a biological evolution. Okay, we can view society, and I know it's difficult. I'm going to say a few words on why for us it's difficult to accept. Okay, but let for a minute imagine, okay, that society is a permeable organism. Let us see where does it lead us. Public transportation is perhaps a crude version of circulation systems in organisms. Legal systems, policing, defense forces are perhaps crude systems of immune system or images of immune system. And electronic communication can be thought of as a sort of nervous system in an organism. Things have changed throughout human history, okay? And let me characterize inseparability. In the case of human society, is the incapability of an individual or a small subgroup to survive on their own as an independent entity disconnected from the rest of society, okay? So all of a sudden it becomes clear that inseparability increases with time. I'll show you more of that in a minute. Society is certainly larger, network of ties is denser, division of labor and specialization perhaps increases. I say perhaps, let us look at it. But the first thing is the size of the society, okay? The largest size of society in hunter-gatherer communities, I think, is thousands. But I'm not sure if I'm wrong. That's the time to let me know that someone said tens of thousands in hunter-gatherer. For now, let us stick with these numbers. The largest social unit back in 3000 BC was the Mesopotamian city-states, and that they were the order of magnitude of nearly 10,000 of people. Few years later, or few centuries later, we have a Sumer with tens of thousands of people. And only 200 years later, we already jump another order of magnitudes to hundreds of thousands of people in the first empire in the world, that's the Akkadian Empire. The Persian Empire, 2,000 years later, is estimated to be anything between 17 to 35 million. In any case, it's 10 to the power of 7. Then we have quiet for 2,000 years, because even Rome and China fluctuated below 100 millions until China in the 16th century sometimes reaches its more than 100 million people. And China again marks the next record of more than 1 billion in 1982. And we can conceive now the entire humanity as a social unit. is a single organization, is very loose organization. But in terms of economic connections, cultural connections, there is some justification perhaps to view the entire humanity, except of sometimes in Amazonas and elsewhere, as a single social unit. And it is estimated to jump again another order of magnitude to 10 billions around 2050. This is not the focus of my talk, but I just couldn't resist putting those dots on the graph. And this is what it looks like. So there was a jump by 2 orders of magnitude within 500 years that was back around 5,000 years ago. Then the next 2 orders of magnitude took 4,000 years. And then 500 years ago, there started another jump that led us to more orders of magnitude. And I'm talking about not the population size in the world, only the largest social unit at any given time. So let us look at other parameters of complexity. And so I spoke about the increase in size. What about inseparability? I would like to quantify it. And in principle, it could be quantified to be a continuous variable between 0 and 1. I cannot do it robustly at this point. So I just refer there is still inseparability throughout history until perhaps the 20th century. I mean, we can conceivably think of us, perhaps with our own family, getting away from off the grid, okay? Find some place that's entirely isolated from the rest of humanity and survive. Perhaps it could happen, perhaps not. How often does it happen? So I put inseparability already in 1982. Reproductive specialization, perhaps there are indications that it's going to happen, but I cannot say it's there, so it's minus. Non-reproductive specialization, I know it was discussed by McShay, who said, well, there is no real specialization because we can always transfer. But again, the probability of us becoming carpenters, the probability of carpenters becoming, evolutionary biology scientists is slim. Okay, so even though the potential is there for us to switch, how often do we switch? How often do we specialize? I suggest in fact, in humanity, there is non-reproductive specialization from back times immemorial. So let me conclude here. With time, human society is becoming more complex, more individuated, okay? By now, society has marked 3 of the 4 indicators of individuation, and size, inseparability, and non-reproductive specialization. And this is the time to say why it is so hard to conceive. Why do we reject, some of us at least, some people that I spoke to in the last 2 years, just rejected the notion that we are going in this direction. The reason is that we are individuals, okay? And how can we think of us as giving up individuality? That's one of the hallmarks of a human being, is being individual. Inconceivable, because our individual freedom may be growing in recent centuries. It's not going down, it's growing, actually. We have more freedom of opportunity, okay? We can go anywhere on the globe that we wish to. But is this an indication of being individual? Ask any cell, are you autonomous? I think the cell would respond, yes, I am autonomous. Of course, I have connections, relations, but I am autonomous. I'm a productive unit.
But
Where?
I'm controlled by all of those rules of development. It would be, I'm not, they may, this requires the cell to be able to have some aspirational ability and so on. But I think the cell, if it knew that it could be an individual free living organism, would feel as if it is, it looks competent. It would feel super constrained and controlled by laws and regulations. Look at it, lots of
Right. And we are different. Are we different in this respect?
Yes, we are, but we could be, you know, if you let me be a despotic ruler, I can, I'm sure, bring about a transition in human societies. You know, conceptually, we could do this, and we would be horrified. We would be the equivalent of workers in a colony, and it would be the direct, predictable outcome of selection working. You would require selection to work at the level of groups that we would need to unethically impose boundaries around and control the modes of group reproduction. But I'm sure that those kind of conditions that allow groups to participate as units of selection in their own right would, in actually a quite quick period of time, result in a transition where we would be the equivalent of cells in our body or workers in a hive. And I don't think it's ever going to happen because barring a despotic ruler or some other change of vast magnitude, the possibility that selection acts at the level of collectives of humans is not there.
Okay, I think at this point we may agree that we are not there yet. I hope I convinced at least some of you that there is a direction. What's going to be in the future? There is no telling. I could imagine some scenarios that are different than from your optimistic scenario. I certainly hope, deeply hope that you are correct. That it would never happen. But I cannot say that I'm convinced. Okay? Wishful thinking aside, cannot say that I'm convinced. So we can argue about it, okay? And there would be different opinions on that. But there is one thing we can also do, and that make predictions, okay? So if the approach that I'm proposing here is valuable, then we should be able to propose predictions and test them. So for example, one prediction was made by Celine actually, human society conflicts of interest would increasingly be resolved in favor of the collective. Okay, so you take your own nation, go to the records of trials, okay, to the High Court, and see with time, do they judge more and more in favor of the nation over the, I mean, in those specific how do you say trials, in those specific trials that it is a person versus the nation, okay? This is only a single prediction. We can think of different predictions and test them and then see if there is any value in this approach or not. And yeah, I think this concludes my presentation.
We actually already started the discussion, but we have time for a few more questions.
Yeah, I wanted to, you know, we are saying that we are, in a sense, more constrained because we're becoming part of a whole, that we're constrained by it, so on and so forth. I think that the human species has this very strange ability of internalizing the society. Our super-ego, what Freud called the super-ego, is the internalized image of the society's norms and so on. In a way, we are more autonomous, more complex, certainly more complex and certainly more able to define ourselves. Our own individuality grows enormously rather than diminishes. In the same way that the social animal, that if you compare social to non-social animal, the social animal defines itself vis-a-vis not only the environment, but also vis-a-vis other individuals. We define ourselves vis-a-vis other individuals, vis-a-vis societal norms, vis-a-vis ideas and things like that. So when you're thinking about individuality, the individuality of the individual within a complex society, and you're thinking about human beings and not about other kinds of species, this is something you have to take into consideration. And I think when you take it into consideration, this puts a big, big question mark on this, on our subordination to the collective.
So one thing first I want to say is to put things on record because I feel I should be a bit more generously. I have. Okay. So I want to explain two things. Why I think there's some beauty in this picture, and why I can't take credit when you say it's a common work in the sense that you had these ideas and this picture, and I would like to suggest for you to think why it's important. But I can't say I really had a contribution, so I can't take credit for things that you did. It bothers me the whole talk. So okay.
I take full responsibility for any claim that you don't like here.
No, it just bothers. Yeah, I can't. That's not the reason.
Okay. I know. I'm just kidding. In the first part, you had a meaningful contribution in helping me to structure the framework.
I want to say what I like here and why it was important for me, together with Yohay and you, to bring you here. So the thought of this workshop came out after I read I saw this table, and this is the idea. So what you see here is a kind of table that tries to operationalize something extremely fuzzy and extremely important. Now, I don't think that operationalizing something helps you grab the essences. I'm not sure. So this is the only thing I think I disagree. I don't think this table, even if it's correct, can draw our attention to some common essences. No, I think operationalization is important for a different reason. It connects to standardization. And when you standardize something, the first thing you see is where it's inaccurate. Where are the problems? Okay, where there's imprecisions. And I think that's extremely helpful. Because if we look at this kind of table and what it can give us is directions in what needs to be better clarified, directions in where we can agree in order to bring about some kind of a prediction, directions in where we clearly, a group of us, robustly disagree. So this kind of a broad picture can allow us to think together of some kind of common, the beginning of a common language to cover this thing. And that is why it was important to bring you here. Because what you bring into this room is the ability to draw these rough lines for a common language. And even when you disagree with the table, I think it's very fruitful. And when you agree, and if we manage to agree on some points, that's also very fruitful. Okay?
I really like the energy in the room, but I think the plan, and I think it's good if we adjourn for coffee and then come back for discussion when you're so angry.
But
you want to dissipate the anger?
No, I'm not going to respond. Just I need to hear people.
Okay, so questions and no answers.
So thank you. I have one comment on the zoological part and one on the human part. So for the zoological part, I've been thinking about this very large world of reproductive parasites. You could think of like this castrating barnacle that infests a crab and it takes over the reproductive system, and it's forced a kind of extended phenotype where both organisms coexist together. They're inseparable. One of them is reproducing, it's only the parasite, and the other one is castrated, and yet it's a system of two organisms only. So it doesn't really fit your scheme, and we need to think about it. And regarding the second part, you talked about increasingly large human societies, but you only considered the political structures.
Indeed, and economic, political economic.
But thinking about those exciting talks about social norms, I think they're greatly imposed not by political structures, but for example, by religious affiliation or by family affiliation. And I'm not sure that those structures indeed increased over history similarly to the political structures. So we should think about that as well.
It was a very nice talk, and I remember to have refereed a paper which had this table in it, and it was obviously your.
So you were the referee.
I was a favorable referee. I don't know what happened to the paper. I somehow lost it.
We got so many comments from you. Yeah, I forgot to mention. I was not sure it's you actually. I had my own. We submitted, Ayelet and myself submitted the paper to Proceedings B, and we got many comments from 3 reviewers. 2 of them really liked it. 1 of them was less approving, but all 3 of them gave us that list of papers that we need to read and read from. So we are in the process of.
So I just want to state that this is, I think, a very important initiative, and I like the framework. I like especially these different dimensions, you know, whereby you can measure things. So that was a very nice tool. I think I will adopt it right in the future. Thank you very much. Now regarding the future, I mean, you have this thing that it's very difficult to predict, especially the future, right? And yeah, but I think that there is a partial analogy between the question whether this humanity is becoming a unit and the Gaia problem for biological evolution, and it's also related to, you know, the question of global stability for the biological world and for the social world. Now, in the case of the Gaia problem, people have come up with mechanisms that are not so Darwinian, but in a broader sense evolutionary, that can contribute, like sequential selection and these kinds of things. It's very important to look at Tim Lenton's recent summary of these non-standard mechanisms. But if you look at any of those mechanisms, they don't have any guarantee that the Gaia solution is bound to happen. It just says that if you have a series of planets with the same initial conditions, there will be lucky planets in which those mechanisms will go on for long and long and long, but others, you know, are just collapsing very early, and that's it. And I think that we are in a similar situation regarding society. I know it's a strong claim, but I am afraid that in 2050, many people, 2050, we might actually have lost technological civilization as we know it. And I have reason to argue why I think, but that's another matter. But just to single out one, what Sergey was talking about, right? There's a deep tension here, because liberal democracy is deeply tied to the idea of capitalism. But capitalism creates inequality, and inequality makes democracy to collapse in a way. Right? And I think that there could be, you know, these cycles of collapse and growth, and collapse and development, collapse of development, which in a little bit in line with the sequential selection idea for Gaia, could actually give us increased cohesion, stability, whatever. But again, there's absolutely no guarantee that it's bound to happen. Right? We might, you know, disgracefully collapse, and that's it. And I'm sorry to say, it doesn't prove, but it's completely in line with the Fermi paradox. Right? Now, it's completely in line with the Fermi paradox. Yeah, there might be many intelligent species out there, but if that's the pattern that is typical, most of the time you are not going to see them. You know, they have a limited lifestyle, and therefore they have a communicative window which is very short, and it is goodbye. Sorry to be so pessimistic.
Glad we are here before we take off.
My question is much shorter. I would like Ayala to say where her talk coincides with what we just heard.
It's very short. It doesn't, and Paul just pinpointed it. I wanted you to think about this difference between heterogeneity and diversity, and you could already see how it could be played, but clearly the difference, what I wanted you to think of is collectivity and difference in two different ways. That's all. It's not related.
I have a simple mechanistic questions about reproductive division of labor. You said yes and no, but you didn't give the percentage. How many of the population are reproductive and how much are sterile? And I want to ask, what are the percentages? And if we believe that these percentages are required, how many babies would it require for the reproductive human cats to have a day?
Yeah.
A population of 10 billion.
An improved version of that would include the rate. But I think as long as some units are non-reproductive, this means that we are already one step forward towards a higher level individual. Anyway, so even if that proportion is, I don't know, 20%? Actually, I'm not sure about proportions. I don't want to say anything, but clearly the larger is the proportion of non-reproducing individuals, the stronger is individuality. Okay, the farther you are in the individuation process.
You do have some limit on human birth.
Are you talking about the biological reproduction only or cultural reproduction?
That's a different.
It's another thing for the improved version.
So I'm on board with part of it, and particularly the idea of looking for some unifying principles and so on. But I think that unifying principles and concepts will only come if we think about process. The features of organisms that you described, extant organisms, I think, readily explain as consequences of the process, particularly of evolution by natural selection. The nice thing about natural selection is it's the only evolutionary process that we know about that really can drive change. I'm not saying driven is only not important, but in the absence of a process, evolution by natural selection, there wouldn't be no complex life because we would be reliant on chance alone. So if we consider this process, it's an extraordinarily important process. If we then think about the properties necessary for it to play out, then we have a framework. We can measure this. We can ask about the extent of heritable variance and fitness. We can track genealogy. We can measure this. And that principle can then apply at each transition. We can even see what brings it about. I don't want to go on giving a lecture, but I want to advocate for the value of a process driven set of concepts that I think really do stand to unify transitions and individuality, certainly the hierarchical ones that you've mentioned here. Once we get to human culture, there is, we have also that's a consequence, and there are many more enormous implications of that, for sure. But in terms of lower level self-replicating structures becoming nested within higher level self-replicating structures, I really think the ideas that Peter Godfrey Smith have developed in recognizing that transitions involve the emergence of Darwinian properties at the next level of the hierarchy. And everything else is kind of a consequence of that. Once you have a selective process unfolding, that's why I say life on another planet will have exactly the same hierarchical structure. But at least €1 on that.
Actually, I have no idea what we're doing in terms of time, so just let's take the time again. I guess we're supposed to have a break now.
Yeah,
and we'll let you know.
Either coffee or lunch now.
No, it's still just coffee.
Coffee, okay. Short coffee break.
Just interesting passage for what
too spiritual, then I somehow get the feeling that this is where it's fine. And for that, it took about 3 weeks. That's the real.
Dan, can you hear us?
I'm sure you will say.
Yes, yes, I can hear you fine. Thank you. Are we off schedule? I just joined.
Problematizes the whole dynamics, right? So, yeah, no, sometimes it's still different things.
I think you should be able to geographically as
I
to consider the next step.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, because
Dan, can you hear me?
yes, I can.
Okay. So
Are we?
now there is a coffee break,
Yeah.
half an hour, and because there was some slight change to the calendar, to the schedule. So Yohay gave his talk before.
Oh, okay.
But I will upload it.
Okay, thank you.
It was like last minute. I was not aware of it.
That's fine. That's fine. No.
And after the coffee break, there is Offer Fireman's lecture, and probably Marcus as well. And then lunch, and then there will be like a discussion, and then the subgroup preparation.
Okay. Let me look at my schedule, my version of the schedule for a moment, if you would. So we've got, I see. So we're going to be running about a half hour early the whole way. Is that right?
No, because we are now have like a coffee break, and then Offer and Marcus talk, and then lunch.
I see. And then lunch after Marcus. Got it. Okay.
Let me just check with Yohay. I'm just telling Dan the new schedule because he's. So we have now a coffee break, half an hour, like 20 minutes.
Joined us?
10 minutes ago.
Oh, you missed my.
Yeah.
But I will try to upload it ASAP to the YouTube.
Tell him that. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I was planning. I got up.
Okay. I wanted to say that we had to change schedule, and therefore you could not hear my talk. But I may come to Duke and give a talk in your department.
Oh, really? Okay, that would be great. That would be great, and I'll hear your talk on replay.
Okay. So the schedule from now on will be pretty much similar to the original.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're going to move into groups now, so I'm going to sort of have to fade into the background here.
No, actually, we still have 2 interesting talks before we split.
Yes, I'm going to hear those 2 talks. And actually, you have 3 interesting talks. You've got Corning coming up. Is that right?
Right. Later in the afternoon. For you, it will be morning by then.
It's already morning. It's already morning for me.
Easy. Okay.
No, I just got up, and I will listen to the replay of your talk. I caught the end of the discussion just now, and it sounded like from the 15 minutes that I heard, 10 minutes that I heard, that everybody's on pretty much the same page in terms of natural selection driving increase in individuation. At least several people said that, and nobody disagreed. I think you said that sometime in the past 10 minutes, that we've got this process of new levels arising all the time, and selection is the driving force of greater and greater individuation. one of the hallmarks of that is division of labor. And I know you think this way from your paper. I'm just impressed that everybody else seems on board with it. Does that sound fair?
As you said, no one has disagreed, but we did not make a survey, you know, so people may have been quiet, even if they disagree.
Okay, of course. Yeah. Well, you'll find that out in the discussions
Right.
at the discussion phase.
Certainly.
Right?
Certainly.
Yep.
Yes.
So as long as I've got you, if you have a minute, do you have a minute now?
Yes.
Okay. So looking at your scale of individuation and looking at my scale of individuation and looking at the way that the marine invertebrate people back in the 70s were looking at individuation, the overlap is enormous. Everybody's thinking on roughly the same lines about how this works, about what the sort of steps involved are in terms of division of labor, in terms of specialization, in terms of emergence of higher level parts. So
yes.
This was a big deal back in the 70s, the notion that a colony could make something physical that didn't consist of lower level organisms, that consisted of you know, the nest in an ant colony is not made up of ants. The nest itself is a physical structure, and you need a certain amount of sophistication, individuation of the whole to get that sort of structure to form. So I'm really gratified to hear that this is the sort of talk that everybody is at least remaining silent for, and some of us, some people are actually on board with, because it's got a long history to it, and it fell silent for decades.
Yes. Yes, and it will come up even stronger in the discussion, I guess.
Yeah, okay, good.
Okay, good. And I was serious about the proposition to come over and visit you.
Okay, I will see what I can do.
Well, you don't have much to do. I do have the what do you say? I can fund the whole thing. It's not expensive.
Oh, okay. Great. You have travel money then.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Well, it has to be a time when I'm in town, because I'm going out of town later this fall, or in the middle of the fall.
I see.
But the spring is a real possibility.
Okay, let's discuss that then.
Yep. Okay. Good.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
I'm off to have a coffee before we gather again.
Enjoy. Thank you.
Okay, Dan. So we are now on coffee break.
Yep.
Probably 20 minutes, and in 20 minutes, Ofer will give his talk about the ant colony.
Yep.
Then we'll go to lunch, and basically we are back to the original schedule.
Okay. So
and then Marcus.
Yep.
This will be the last talk, and then the subgroup session.
In terms of absolute time, am I right that Marcus will start at around, if we stay on schedule now, he'll start 30 minutes early, so at 1500. Oh, I'm sorry, at not 1500, at 1420, is that right?
1420. Yeah, it probably will start the same time, because Ofer will start at 12:40.
Yeah.
And then we're back to the original schedule. It's like then lunch and then just Marcus.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So I will try during lunch to upload all at least Yohay's talk.
Yes, please. If you would, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. It will be easier now.
Okay.
Okay. So see you soon.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.